Okay, so hello. Today, we are gonna be talking to Elizabeth Bloom, better known as Beth. She's a sophomore at Dartmouth College with a strong interest in medicine and global health. Beth has had a lot of direct experience with Latin America. She has participated in various programs where she has lived and worked in Latin American countries, including a summer living and working with a family in rural Ecuador and a month of service in Nicaragua. Hey Beth, how are you?
Hi, Esteban. I'm doing great.
Okay, so now I'm just gonna start with a simple series of questions and about your experience in Nicaragua. So, why did you go on a service trip to Nicaragua?
My freshman roommate and I went over our winter of our freshman year because she had been volunteering for a couple years in a maternity clinic in rural city in Nicaragua, and she invited me to go with her.
Okay, and specifically when and where was this experience?
It was December of 2014, and I mostly spent my time in Jinotega, Nicaragua, and visited a few other cities.
Yeah, okay, that's very cool. We actually had a lot of people who've gone to Jinotega. So what was your trip composed of? What did you do over there?
For the majority of the trip, we were staying in Jinotega, and we were basically shadowing a doctor and volunteering at a maternity home for women with high-risk pregnancies. We spent a couple days at the end of the trip and in the middle of the trip doing some tourism.
Okay, very cool. And what were some of your first experiences with the trip? Like, how did you feel when you first got there, when you first met the people, when you first realized what you were doing?
Um, I don't really remember. When I first got there, let's see. So the first day we went to the clinic. I remember being just shocked as to how much they let me do as an 18-year-old freshman in college who knew nothing about medicine or about gynecology, and they were letting us take the baby's heartbeat measurements and doing all sorts of things that I would definitely never be allowed to do in the U.S. So that was definitely surprising. I was also surprised as to how young all the women were who were at the maternity clinic and how young the pregnant women were. There was a girl there who was 12 years old, so that was definitely pretty shocking.
So, Beth, I don't know if you're aware, but volunteerism and the concept that sometimes people do service not for the purpose of helping other people, but because they just want to travel is there's a big controversy in the volunteering world. So I was just wondering, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think for sure that's definitely, I mean, I'll admit that's definitely part of why I wanted to go to these places. I wanted to travel to Ecuador, I wanted to travel to Nicaragua, it sounded like fun. And I wanted to go I wanted to be able to help people, but knew that with my level of education and experience, I couldn't really do a whole lot. So mostly I feel like what I've gotten out of these trips is that I've learned a lot from traveling. I've learned about communities and about how systems work so that in the future I can I can make more impact once I'm more experienced and have more education and knowledge about how to approach these situations. So I think it's definitely a very valid concern that volunteers are going just to travel and not to help people, especially teenagers and college students, because they don't really have the skills to do so. Um, but I don't think that necessarily means that they shouldn't go, because I think there's a lot to be learned from these trips, even if there's sort of outsiders just watching and learning from the communities they visit.
Okay, and going off of that, so then when you were planning your trips, the couple that you mentioned, did you before going there consider like maybe your impact on the people in the local places?
Did we consider? I don't know if we directly considered the impact we were having. I think something we thought about going in was the fact that here we are as first year college students, although we want to make a great big difference and we want to help out and we want to do things, we probably won't be able to based on just because we aren't really able to, we don't have any real skills that would be helpful to the people that we were going to work with. So what question am I answering again? Did I consider the impact of the people? I think we considered it in a way that we wouldn't be able to impact people, though I don't think in a positive way necessarily, wouldn't have much of an impact one way or the other, but I guess we didn't really consider what kind of negative impacts our trip could have if they were having any.
Okay, and you mentioned that you did also some tourism. How did you manage tourism and volunteering at the same time?
So we worked during the weeks and we took trips on the weekends. We took buses out to different areas of the country to see what we thought would be most interesting. So, I mean, that's about it. The week was our work week and the weekends were for vacationing.
Okay, so we've talked about the influence on the people of Nicaragua in relation to your trip, but how did you benefit? How did you benefit from the trip in any way, or how did you think it
I think
helped you?
I learned a lot the about just sort of how to go about service work in other countries and how it's really much more important to spend the time getting to know the people and getting to know how the systems you're working in are set up and how to work within the infrastructure that's already there, and that you really can't do much until you understand who you're working with and what you're working with and what the context is. That you can't just come in with a plan of what to do. That there's so many other factors you have to consider, and it just takes time to get to know all of that context and to see what the actual needs on the ground are before you can actually do anything. And in both of the trips I've been on, I really haven't been there long enough to address all of the things going on in the communities and all of the factors that would be important to figuring out how to truly move the community forward.
Okay. Um, as far as your experience in Nicaragua, you mentioned that you were shocked by how much they were letting you do. I'm wondering, what were there any other things that like just shocked you, like coming from like a country like the United States?
I would say Nicaragua not so much. Even Ecuador not so much. I think both for both my trips, especially well for Nicaragua, I had been to Ecuador, so I'd been to a less developed country already, and I was mostly prepared for what that was like. Um, and it's not as different from being in the U.S. as I would have expected. And then in terms of preparing, being shocked when I got to Ecuador, even then I don't think I was that surprised because I had been trained a lot through the program I was going to of what things were going to be like. So I actually would say no, that there wasn't that much I was all that shocked about.
Okay, and going along with that, um, we've in our class we've talked a lot about how gender roles really influence Nicaraguan culture. Did you see any things that you thought were interesting in relation to gender roles in Nicaragua?
For sure. So I guess if this maybe even goes into what shocked me a little, if I wasn't that surprised, I definitely, as a girl, a white girl, especially in Nicaragua, experienced much more like I don't know if I call it discrimination, but I mean we were being catcalled, and there was definitely looked at very differently than I would be in the U.S. walking down the street. And I don't know if that's because I'm white, because I'm a girl. Like there are a lot of factors going into it. Um, but so definitely experience. Well, personally, I definitely experienced that. In terms of the Nicaraguan people in Nicaragua, I think that we were in this maternity clinic of women who are from rural communities who came to the clinic um, because they had high risk pregnancies and were about to give birth, and so they wanted to be in the city closer to the hospital. And definitely you could see sort of the impact of gender roles on women, especially in rural Nicaragua, and that there really are very few options for them. That they, especially this 12-year-old and the very young girls that we saw, clearly these pregnancies were unwanted. That they have very little access to contraceptives and and no, very few resources to take care of the children once they have them. You could definitely see that this was a largely a female problem. That oftentimes there was no husband, father, brother in the picture who was helping out, um, and so there was definitely the sense that these women were on their own, and that there was very little set up in the infrastructure to help them out, except for maybe these clinics. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
And lastly, Nicaragua, for much of its history, has had a very significant political atmosphere, and in relation to like just the country, but also internationally. And they were in a civil war in the 80s, and there's still remnants of that feeling. I just wanted to know if you experienced anything that was interesting in relation to that.
Um, I think had I known more about the history at the time, I would have been more able to recognize what was reminiscent of that history. But I don't. I mean, we saw signs for the FSLN all over the place. There was lots of, and also a lot of sort of propaganda from the government. There was this phrase that was on everything. It was something like faith, community, and family, or something like that. And it had, I guess, the current president. I mean, you'll know more about this than I do, but the current president of Nicaragua was atheist in the past or something like that, and then he's now trying to recapture the popularity of the population by bringing Catholicism into his politics. So you could see him trying to do that with this slogan that he had. I can't remember the exact words of what the slogan was. And you could definitely, he definitely did not seem like the most popular guy with the people we talked to, the president. The taxi cab driver we talked to on our first night was telling us about how his wife wanted these ornate orange trees to be built in the Capitol along the highway. They sort of lit up almost like bright Christmas decorations along the highway in Managua, and he said that each one cost something like $80,000, and that you could see that there's clearly corruption and misappropriation of funds and extortion of money going on, and that the taxi cab driver and others clearly had pretty strong resentment of that, but were not super vocal about it. Sort of seemed to be towing on a line of like what they could say and what they couldn't say. There was definitely, and a lot of people talked to us about the history and like what their roles in the revolution were and where they were, what they were doing, and if they were lost in network had thought in the revolution or played some role. So you could definitely feel that it was in their recent memory.
Okay. Well, thank you, Beth, for talking to us.
You're welcome.
Or to me.
Okay.
Bye.